Good morning, everyone. Another week of remote learning, another lesson that we're going to have to get through today. I figured I would kind of quickly go through the notes with you just to talk about a couple of things. This lesson is overall very short, um, and it should give us kind of clarity of kind of the next portion that we're going to be looking at, which is basically graphs. Okay. But to look at to like trig graphs, like a sine graph or a cosine graph, we first need to be able to really understand what type of graphs we're going to be seeing. And so today that kind of leads us into this whole idea of a periodic function. Okay. Now, to really understand what a periodic function is, we have to understand what periodic means. Okay. A lot of you probably have that in your head right now, which is a periodic is something that repeats. Okay. Something that is periodic is going to overly kind of repeat itself over and over and over again. Okay. A common example of this would be like a Ferris wheel. If you're sitting in a seat at one point, you're going to be starting at the top. It's going to rotate all around until you're back at the top. And you could say that about any spot of the Ferris wheel because it constantly repeats that motion. Okay. It's one big circle. It just constantly repeats that motion over and over again. Okay. These types of functions are basically what we're going to be dealing with within our sine and cosine. Okay, we're going to look at graphs that are going to overly repeat themselves. Okay, so the first step is really understanding, is something periodic or is it not? And so to do this, we got to kind of look at some certain graphs like this. For example, if I look at this graph right above here, right here, we want to basically determine, is this graph periodic? And there's a couple of ways you could really look at this. First off, what I like to do is I like to look at the max and the mins. Note, if I took a line here and I drew it across this graph, you would notice that each time those maximums hit the same exact spot. It's not like you have a different location for each one. Same thing, if I go around the bottom here, all the minimums also hit the same exact spot. Okay? Now, we'll be talking about a lot of those things like periods, amplitudes, things like that, what we can find within the graph. But we want to be able to do first is just understand if something's periodic. And one of the easy ways to do this is just to look at the graph and say, are my maximums and are my minimums always repeating at the same spot? Okay. The last thing you could really look at is, are you hitting it in the same motion each time? Are you actually reaching that maximum at the same location or at the same time for each point? Well, if you notice, at this point, usually around, what is that? About a half, it starts over and then repeats again each time. So notice each time from max to max, it takes the same amount of time to actually get there. Okay. So once again, that's kind of what we're looking for. Now, if we go a little bit more in depth here, if I look at the bottom here of this page, well, I get this graph right here, and you can kind of see, and you probably already know that this can't be periodic. If we follow the same rules, here's my maximum, and if I drew a line across it, none of the other graphs, none of the other portions ever reach it. Okay? Same with my minimum. Here's my minimum. None of them ever reach it. Okay? And it's so because of this, this can't be periodic. It's something that we can't be dealing with today. And so that's kind of the first portion we want to talk about, how something is periodic and how we can kind of deal with it. But if something is periodic, we want to know a little bit more about it. Okay? There are three very specific things that we're going to actually try to find today. Okay? We're going to have the period. Oops, let me scroll down a little bit. We're going to have the period, the amplitude, and the midline. All three of which are going to be important vocab terms for us to understand because each of those we're actually going to try to find within the graph. Okay. Note, a period is the horizontal distance required for the graph of a periodic function to complete one repetition or cycle. Okay. To kind of put that in perspective, a period is how long it takes to repeat. How long it takes to repeat. Okay. The amplitude is kind of an equation. If you notice over here in this bold letters, to actually find the period, it's so more like an equation where you take the max minus the min and then cut it in half. Okay. And last but not least, the midline. Easier said than done. The midline is just the middle of the graph. Now, a lot of people assume this is just going to be at zero. However, it does change. It kind of depends on where the graph is located. It is just your true middle